If you look closely at the global aviation route map, you'll eventually find flights that appear to completely violate the laws of geography, economics, and common sense. They look like absolute glitches on the screen. For instance, why is Singapore Airlines, a carrier based entirely in Southeast Asia, operating an A350 on a hop between Milan, Italy, and Barcelona, Spain? Or why is Ethiopian Airlines flying a 787 between Stockholm and Oslo? Far from being rare charter operations or temporary deviations, these routes are regular, scheduled services. They're operated by world-class airlines thousands of miles away from their actual home hubs, carrying passengers strictly between two completely foreign nations. Operating this way seems to ignore the fundamental hub and spoke logic dictating how modern network carriers survive and turn a profit. To understand how an airline ends up flying wide bodies far from their home countries, you have to ignore modern aviation technology and market analysis entirely. The answer is hidden in the very first legal framework of international travel, a treaty drafted in November of 1944 before the commercial jet age even began. So, let's turn back the clock and figure out exactly how a simple legal workaround managed to permanently bend the global route map. In November of 1944, delegates from 54 Allied and neutral nations convened at the Stevens Hotel in Chicago. They recognized that the imminent end of the conflict would suddenly release a massive surplus of transport aircraft and trained pilots into the commercial sector. Their objective was to essentially write the constitution of the sky before the post-war aviation boom could descend into chaos. They drafted the Chicago Convention on International Civil Aviation, a treaty that outlined the fundamental freedoms of the air. The first few freedoms were incredibly straightforward and universally accepted, granting basic privileges like the right to fly over another country's airspace or to land for emergency repairs. However, the fifth freedom on that list stood out as a structural outlier. It granted an airline the right to originate a flight in its home country, land in a second sovereign nation to drop off and pick up new paying passengers, and then continue onward to a third country. To a modern observer, this sounds like a deliberate legal loophole designed for aggressive market expansion. In 1944, however, the fifth freedom wasn't a competitive trick. It was a matter of aircraft range. Early commercial airliners like the DC-4 or the Lockheed Constellation were engineering marvels of their time, but they were severely restricted by the volume of their fuel tanks. Flying non-stop across the Atlantic Ocean or traversing the massive expanse of the Asian continent was physically impossible. An airline attempting these long-distance journeys was forced to execute a hopscotch routing, landing 3 or 4 times to refuel. This created an economic dilemma. Every time an aircraft landed, the airline incurred landing fees and refueling costs that varied from place to place. If a passenger bought a ticket from Europe to the Middle East and got off at the second fuel stop, that seat would remain empty for the rest of the journey to Asia. Flying thousands of miles with empty seats while still paying for fuel is a guaranteed formula for rapid bankruptcy. The fifth freedom was explicitly designed to solve this financial nightmare by allowing airlines to operate like a local bus service on a global scale. We can look at KLM Royal Dutch Airlines and their historic route between Amsterdam and modern-day Jakarta as the perfect case study. This journey took days to complete and required a grueling sequence of mandatory technical stops. An aircraft would depart the Netherlands and navigate its way through Athens, Cairo, Baghdad, Karachi, Calcutta, and Bangkok before finally reaching the Dutch East Indies. Without the fifth freedom, KLM would have bled cash on every single departure, but instead, this treaty granted them the legal right to sell tickets strictly between those intermediate cities. They could pick up a businessman in Cairo and drop him off in Baghdad, and then fill that exact same seat in Karachi with a passenger headed to Calcutta. By monetizing the fuel stops and continuously replenishing their paying passenger load along the way, KLM subsidized the astronomical cost of the overall journey. As the industry transitioned into the jet age during the late 50s and early 60s, the application of the fifth freedom began to shift. The introduction of aircraft like the 707 and 747 drastically increased the speed and range of commercial travel. These new planes could comfortably cross the Atlantic or the Pacific without needing to stop for fuel on a remote island. However, the world is incredibly large and airline network planners still faced a massive geographic wall. An American carrier could easily fly nonstop from San Francisco to Tokyo, but reaching deep into Southeast Asian markets like Manila or Singapore on a single flight remained impossible. The fifth freedom evolved from a desperate measure to buy gas into a strategy for regional market dominance. Legacy airlines realized they could use this treaty and build massive distribution centers outside their home countries entirely. American carriers like Northwest Orient and Pan Am executed this strategy flawlessly by turning Tokyo into a foreign hub. The logic was a masterclass in network economics. Northwest would fly a 747 from the United States mainland directly into Japan. And instead of trying to force that aircraft further into Asia with a fraction of its seats filled, they would completely offload hundreds of passengers at Narita. From there, the airline utilized a secondary fleet of smaller aircraft permanently stationed in Japan. They would take the arriving American travelers, combine them with newly ticketed Japanese passengers, and distribute them across a network of secondary Asian destinations. Because the 1944 treaty gave them the legal right to sell tickets strictly between Tokyo and Seoul or Tokyo and Manila, these secondary routes became incredibly profitable standalone operations. European legacy carriers replicated this exact same model on the other side of the globe. Airlines like KLM and British Airways established strategic outposts in cities like Bangkok or Singapore. They use these foreign bases to funnel European traffic onto regional flights, creating a highly efficient bridge to Australia and the deepest parts of Asia. During this golden age, the Fifth Freedom transformed into the undisputed backbone of international airline expansion. Carriers proved they could operate highly lucrative networks thousands of miles away from home, provided they had the legal paperwork to do so, and thanks to the treaty, they did. Now let's talk about modern-day aviation. Engineering marvels like the 787 or A350 possess the incredible range required to link almost any two major global cities without stopping. A flight from New York to Singapore or London to Perth is now a standard daily operation. The absolute necessity for a technical fuel stop or a foreign redistribution hub has nearly evaporated. By all logical metrics, the Fifth Freedom route should have quietly retired into the history books, but the legal loophole has actually mutated. Modern international airlines look at this 80-year-old treaty framework and realized it was no longer a tool for survival. It was a highly effective weapon for aggressive market expansion. Because these rights were permanently codified into international law, carriers retained the legal authority to fly strictly between two foreign nations. Network planners began identifying incredibly lucrative routes dominated by legacy carriers who were either overcharging passengers or offering a subpar in-flight experience. They realized they could use their superior aircraft to directly attack competitors on their own turf. This brings us back to the geographical glitches on the modern route map. When Emirates deploys an A380 every single day between New York and Milan, they are absolutely not stopping for fuel on their way to Dubai. They're intentionally injecting premium luxury capacity directly onto one of the most profitable transatlantic corridors in the world. They're using a legal workaround to aggressively siphon high-yielding corporate travelers away from American and European legacy airlines. And this predatory logic applies across the entire globe today, driven by the brutal economics of aircraft utilization. An airplane only makes money when it's in the sky, and when a heavy long-haul aircraft arrives at a foreign destination early in the morning, it often sits at a remote stand for 10 or 12 hours waiting for its scheduled evening return flight. Rather than paying airport parking fees for a dormant multi-million-dollar asset, airlines weaponized their Fifth Freedom rights. This is exactly why 4 different intercontinental airlines fiercely compete on a simple 2-hour route between Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Buenos Aires, Argentina. It's the exact reason why Singapore Airlines flies a tiny commuter route between Milan and Barcelona. They take an idle aircraft, fly a quick, highly profitable round trip entirely in foreign territory, and extract maximum financial yield from every single hour that airframe exists. The treaty designed to help airlines survive crossing the ocean has become the ultimate tool for global network arbitrage. So the next time you find yourself in Miami, it might be worth checking out the price of a ticket on Emirates to fly down to Colombia. Booking a Middle Eastern carrier for a quick trip to Colombia feels like a glitch in the system, but it's actually the direct legacy of a decision made before commercial jets even existed. The global airline map is ultimately a living historical document. It reflects decades of engineering evolution colliding with rigid international laws. The Chicago Convention was originally drafted out of pure necessity to keep planes from running out of fuel over the ocean. Today, that exact same paperwork allows massive multi-billion-dollar airlines to park their aircraft in foreign territories and aggressively undercut the local competition. A treaty designed for basic survival has been reverse-engineered into an instrument for global market domination. The enduring presence of the Fifth Freedom Flight proves that the most powerful force in commercial aviation is not always aerodynamics, yet simply a document from a past era.